Period of decline in the United States. To start off, we will see the environmental energy crisis of the 1970s in more detail. Basically, the 1970s was a time of great struggle. The United States was having trouble with energy resources as they were running out of oil and were relying way too much on imports from other countries. As you can see on the U.S. crude oil production versus imports diagram to the left, up until the 1970s, the United States was making the majority, but in 1970 there was a sharp increase of imports as Americans were beginning to buy and consume more imported oil than normal. As a consequence, the production of crude oil in the United States began to fall afterwards until we were importing much more than we were consuming. In other words, the United States was depending on other countries for its energy, and that was something we did not want. The fact that other countries were, as a matter, owning us, they were controlling our energy. That was not good. Nobody wanted other countries to have control over the United States because of its oil and energy resources. The fact was that the United States had to come up with a plan to be able to make their own energy again so they could be independent and did not have to rely on anybody. If for some reason a country wanted to mess with the United States, they could just cut off the United States of all energy, oil, anything that has to do with that, and we would be left alone. As you can see in this picture, people were making lines just to get their gasoline, and as the problem grew bigger, Americans were not able to get as much as easily. On the other hand, the environment was getting worse by the day. Energy consumption was leaving streets dirty, the air polluted, and the water toxic. People were becoming sick, and the living environment was not ideal. One of the big struggles in the 1970s was the inability to balance the energy crisis at hand and the environmental crisis. People were having to choose between them, even though they're both important. But in the end, the energy crisis seemed to be a bit more important at the time, since without energy, the United States, they knew at that time, could not exist. Even today, there was no way we could survive a day without any energy, no oil, no gasoline, nothing. That would bring great chaos. Another big reason that helped push the decline of the United States in the early 21st century was terrorism. One big example that fueled the terror of people was the 9/11 terrorist attack. So many dead so quick made the United States cry in pain. Soon after the attack, the United States government implemented better security for the safety of Americans and made plans of war towards the people responsible of this attack. Although that may have been the case, Americans were still afraid. The fact that one day one of our enemies gets around security and manages to pull another terrorist attack makes the majority of the population fearful. And last but not least, globalization can be controversial whether or not it declined the United States. In my opinion, it did. Some big corporations were costing American tax dollars due to the low wages they were supplying to their employees. One of these corporations was Walmart. They were such a successful corporation because they could afford to have such low prices since they paid very low wages to their employees. Corporations such as this one demonstrated the flaw of the great globalization. Overall, it is in my opinion that all four of these situations ushered in a decline in the United States. Our country's inability to be independent in energy resources made the United States vulnerable to other countries. That is even why Jimmy Carter proposed a solution to the problem. He tried implementing solutions such as reducing the energy they were consuming and the imported crude oil, and he was wanting to focus on what America could do on their own and surviving off of that instead of relying on other countries and becoming that much more vulnerable. The environmental crisis was also a step back to the United States. Having polluted air caused many problems. And last but not least, terrorism and globalization during the early 21st century furthered the decline of the United States by inflicting fear through the nation as well as the consequences of globalization.